Welcome to the Liberty Lobbyist, where we teach you political lessons from the purple state of New Hampshire so you can advocate for liberty no matter where you live. I'm Melissa Blasek. I am a former New Hampshire state representative and the current executive director and lobbyist for a grassroots organization called Rebuild NH. We're going to have a little bit of a different show today. Typically, I have on guests that talk about grassroots movements and how you can do things. We don't typically talk about major world issues, but this issue came in and just shook the earth. It felt that I had to address it on a show like this. So we are going to address it. But I am going to talk about grassroots activism. So I often get accused sort of in conservative circles, like, why do you go so hard after other conservatives and Republicans? Why don't you ever go after the Democrats like that? Well, because they're never going to agree with me. What do you mean? So I think in an episode previous to this, I did talk about this, but I want to review the concept of the 5-point scale. If you're ever, let's say you're going to your town council, your city council, your school board, a legislative committee, you're trying to get something passed that you want passed. You need to go in and you need to score every member of that committee on a 5-point scale. Here's your first point, double plus. That's a person who is going to vote the way you want them to vote, no matter what. Doesn't matter. They will crawl over glass to do it. A plus is somebody who generally agrees with you and is pretty in your corner. You're just not sure they're going to crawl over that glass for you. 0 is kind of neutral. It's like they generally agree with you, but you don't really know if they're actually going to vote that way. Negative is somebody who doesn't agree with you, but, maybe could slightly be swayed. And double negative is somebody who will never, under any circumstances, vote the way that you want them to vote on this, no matter what. Can't be swayed. So you don't really need to focus so much on your double pluses. Now, I often ask people, would you then start targeting your 0s or your single plus? And they'll usually say the 0s. That's incorrect. You always want to go with the people who agree with you most first. So you're going to focus in on your pluses. Make sure you really shore them up. Get them really strong in your corner, not only in your corner, advocating for your corner. Okay. If you don't still have enough votes, then you go to your 0s. You don't really need to bother with the negatives or the double negatives for the most part. Certainly never the double negatives. Okay. That is sort of the order on how things work. And that's the same thing. That's the why I complain about people on my side more. The people on the other side don't agree with me. But I'm going to complain about the people on my side who are not doing what they said that they were going to do, who are not voting the way that they said that they were going to vote. Yes, I'm going to complain about it. They're betraying me. So yeah, and I'm going to pressure them. Yeah, you're darn right I am. Such a great example of this just is occurring in Idaho, which of all places, right? I'm sure some people in this audience have heard about the big medical freedom bill that passed in Idaho. Now, proactively, what it actually does, and I feel like it's not getting enough attention, is that they are going to be the first state in the country to end their school vaccine mandates. School vaccine mandates have been in all 50 states for decades and decades and decades. And in Idaho right now, the only vaccine mandates are the school vaccine mandates. It's true that the bill bans all vaccine mandates across public and private, but even on the private side, the only vaccine mandates most states are seeing are in the health sector. And this bill actually carves out the entire health sector. So the only thing that the bill is actually taking that is being done right now and reversing / ending are the school vaccine mandates. And people should be making a much bigger deal out of that because that is massive. That is huge. Now, of course, it also does put sort of the nail in the coffin of all the stuff we lived through with COVID, right? Other vaccine mandates from other, even private sector, any kind of mask mandates, like school mask mandates. I'm still working on that. I'm hoping third time's a charm and it won't get vetoed the third time. But all of that was in this bill, ending all of that, which is fantastic. it also had a carve-out exemption for federal vaccine mandates. So, okay. But awesome stuff. He also, the governor signed a bill to make ivermectin available over the counter via standing order. Third state to do that. Awesome. Now, Brad Little is the governor of Idaho, and he is not known for being particularly conservative governor. He is Republican, but not necessarily particularly conservative. Why is he doing this all of a sudden? That's what we should all be asking ourselves. What happened politically to make this happen? Because he was a terrible COVID governor. Mr. Lockdown himself, Mr. Lockdown mandate, mask up, all that. He did all of that. He has vetoed a ton of legislation before to try to put stops to that. Why now? Well, why now is because Dr. Ryan Cole, who is one of the COVID hero doctors, one of the truth tellers, is considering, a little bit more than considering, he has plenty of backers and financial backers, more importantly, and he's got a ton of national name ID, let alone he's got tons of name ID in the state of Idaho. He's considering strongly a run for governor to primary Governor Brad Little. Some people call him Brad Chicken Little. That's how chicken he usually runs from anything remotely controversial. Well, those two bills are super controversial, but super liked by the right-wing base that he will need to stay in his corner to survive a primary challenger from the right. That's what happens when you push somebody and pull somebody from the right. They're going to move over. It's the same thing on the left. Left-wing activists do that to their people all the time to make sure that they're staying in line, doing what they want. Right-wing activists are typically not as good at it, not as efficient at it, but this was amazing. Now, we haven't had the opportunity to do this with any member of Congress or any governor in a long time because since 2017, Donald Trump has come in and preemptively endorsed every rhino pretty much everywhere. And what that does is the money train dries up. And so we can never mount primary challengers from the right. But I don't know, he's granted us some type of mercy here by not endorsing preemptively Brad Chicken Little. And so, okay, Ryan Cole still has the money behind him. He still has the momentum behind him. And then, of course, he does have the name ID on top of that. So we actually have the opportunity to let the primary system work the way that the primary system should work. Now, you may be thinking, all right, well, that's sweet, but like, I don't have the ability to, influence who is going to primary the governor of my state. And maybe that's true, but maybe you do when it comes to your state legislator. You can go scouring, and you don't probably have a lot of worry anyway of Trump getting involved in that. And so, yeah, primary them from that side. Use them to your advantage. Have them come out and say, I'm primarying this person because of this. Even if they don't win, you might get better results out of your legislator for at least a period of time. I know you're probably thinking that's gross that they would do that just because they have a primary challenger. Yeah, I got news for you. Most politicians, they don't have principles. It's just the way it is. Okay. Most people don't have principles. They do what they got to do for political power. And it is your job as an activist to influence them into the right direction. So I think that this is a great story out of Idaho. That's just an amazing example. We are going to bring on Jason Sorens of the American Institute for Economic Research. He is an economist. He's going to talk about the earthquake that hit the world, Liberation Day, and the American tariff wars. But before we get into that, are you ready to move easily and independently without pain or stiffness holding you back? Do you want to look in the mirror and see a plump, hydrated glow instead of more fine lines and wrinkles? Discover Native Path Collagen made with only type 1 and 3 collagen fibers, the two most important types that make up 90% of collagen in your body. Found in your cartilage, bones, skin, hair, nails, and gut, types 1 and 3 provide maximum benefits without the need for unnecessary fillers. Native Path Collagen is a single ingredient formula with no fillers, additives, or artificial sweeteners. Plus, It's third-party tested for heavy metals, ensuring purity and safety. That's super important to me. Completely flavorless, Native Path collagen can be added to anything, coffee, smoothies, oatmeals, you name it. Its peptide formula is made more bioavailable, meaning it's absorbed more easily and mixes perfectly without clumping. And the best part, Native Path offers amazing bundle deals. You get 3 or 6 packs at a fraction of the price of other brands. With over 4 million jars sold, 2 million happy customers, 8,000 5-star reviews, and a 365-day no-risk guarantee, Native Path is a trusted choice. Plus, they have a 1-800 number for any questions about usage, recipes, or ingredients, and you'll speak to a real person ready to help. Join their private Facebook community to share success stories, recipes, and support each other on this journey called life. Visit getnativepath.com/dailyclout and start your transformation today. That is getnativepath.com/DAILYCLOUT. Welcome to the Liberty Lobbyist, Jason Sorens of the American Institute for Economic Research. You were at Cato for a long time too, right?
Well, I published something with Cato, so
Okay.
I have an affiliation with them, but I've actually never worked there since I was a summer intern back in 1997.
Oh, okay. So I would be remiss if because the very last episode of the show, I interviewed Carla Garrick about the Free State Project. I would be remiss if I did not point out that you are the person that conceived of the idea for the Free State Project. Do you want to start off just by telling people a little bit about that?
Yeah, I was a graduate student, 24 years old, didn't really know what I was doing, and I knew that. I was hoping that someone else would pick up the idea and make it a reality. Eventually, we built a good team around it, but the idea was basically, hey, Liberty folks are not winning at the national level. It's unlikely we'll ever win a majority at the federal level. So why not look at states, find an already pro-liberty state where it'd be easy for us to get involved and make a difference, and also sign up a certain number of people so that when you choose to participate, you know that there are going to be thousands of other people participating with you, so you know the idea can actually work. And so our goal was to get 20,000 people to sign up, and once we got 5,000, we would choose a state. And so we did that. We got 5,000. We held a vote among all 5,000 people, and New Hampshire was the winner. And since then, we've been trying to get people to move to New Hampshire, and we hit 20,000 commitments in 2016. And several thousand people have moved, not 20,000, but far more than enough to make a big difference in the policy process in New Hampshire.
Yeah, no, it's quite an interesting thing. I did tell Carla, so I will tell you, as a New Hampshire native, um, I think that the Free State Project has been mischaracterized a lot, and I appreciate it as, and I've always viewed it as reinforcements.
Right.
And I think, we are the Liberty State, have been, but I do think that we were sort of losing our way a little bit, and it inserted more people here who needed to be here to help us keep what we are and have been, and hopefully will continue to be. But that is actually not why I wanted you on today. We're going to talk about something that we don't typically talk about on the show. Typically, this show is about actionable items, how the average person can actually use tools to attain some type of political outcome. Tariffs are something that the average person does not have any control over. But hopefully we'll get into, I want to, if we have time, to talk a little bit about state level policy. But so let's talk about this. My biggest issue with this from a political standpoint has been, and I'm going to let you get into all of this soon, but the major loss of political capital that the administration has spent on this. For this, I feel like we could have repealed Obamacare. I think we could have done so many other things for the amount of political capital that we've lost. And like what occurs a lot with Donald Trump and his policies, he comes out of the gates with this huge thing, pretty much immediately rolls it back and falls back on it. and his supporters tout it as a victory, and his detractors call him Hitler. So, and neither is true, and nothing really happened, but let's go through it time by time. So before we get into timeline from Liberation Day on, you are an economist, and I want your opinion as a liberty-loving economist on tariffs. Are tariffs good? Are they bad? Or is it gray?
Yeah. Well, liberty-loving economists and all other economists basically agree on tariffs. This is one of the issues you will find very little disagreement from economists on, which is that tariffs gum up the works of exchange, right? And so our economy is built on exchange. It's built on comparative advantage. So the idea that you specialize in what you do best, and that is actually best for you to buy what you don't do well from other people, those goods and services, and to focus on what you do well and sell that in the market. That applies to individuals, it applies to families, it applies to cities, it applies to states, it applies to countries, whatever economic unit you want to talk about. Freer trade really is the best policy under 99.9% of scenarios. And we can come up with, there are certain maybe national security scenarios and things like that where we can say maybe there should be some restriction on, say, exporting nuclear technology or even AI technology to China or North Korea or something like that.
Sure.
Okay, fair enough. But in general, we're better off the fewer restrictions we place on trading with people abroad.
Okay. There are, and this is an argument, I was shocked by the response from fellow conservatives about these tariffs. And I got this kind of thrown back in my face quite a bit of, well, late 1800s, early 1900s, we had far more tariffs than we have now. And things were better. And it was actually the progressives who rolled back the tariffs, FDR rolling back the tariffs. And so it's actually the other side that dislikes tariffs. It's not our side. What would you say to that?
Yeah, so that's a selective reading of the 19th century and the 20th century. When you look at periods when America was growing the fastest, it was the periods when we had lower tariffs. And the classical liberals of the 19th century, the people that would now be libertarians, for example, were opposed to tariffs. This was something that comes out of the work of Adam Smith, David Ricardo, the famous economists, the people who founded the discipline of economics. They were focused on this issue and fighting the mercantilists who wanted to have restrictions on international trade to pursue, reasons of state. And that happened in America too. So it was the people who favored the freest markets who favored freer trade. And that was certainly the case after the Civil War. You could look at probably the most libertarian president we've ever had, Grover Cleveland, as a big example of this. Cleveland was anti-federal spending. He was pro-gold standard. He was anti-imperialism. He's still venerated in Hawaii for having opposed the annexation of Hawaii while he was in office. And he favored free trade. So he was, a down-the-line free market guy. And it was big government guys like William McKinley who favored tariffs, although even McKinley, by the end of his second term, had moved away from protectionism because he realized the problems with it. So really, when you look at the history of this, free marketeers have always been in favor of freer trade in the U.S. and in other countries too, for that matter.
Let's be real. Losing weight isn't just about looking good. It's about taking back control of your overall health. 42% of adults in America are classified as obese. Obesity is directly linked to severe health issues, including heart disease, diabetes, stroke, and cancer. These illnesses are costing Americans over $173 billion each year in medical expenses alone. If you've tried diets and different workouts with no success, it's not your fault. Big food and big pharma have rigged the system against you by contradicting information, leaving you confused. And there's good news. The wellness company just launched Drop, a GLP-1 peptide oral drop formula developed by their chief medical board, specifically designed to support your metabolism, curb cravings, and help you shed weight. That's right. No injections or the risk of severe side effects we are seeing in the Zempic. Simply take drop in water, gradually increase in quantity over time. Let your body do the rest. Start your weight loss journey today and get $50 off plus free shipping. Head to dailyclouthealth.com and use code dailyclout. Take action today for a healthier tomorrow. All right, let's do the timeline starting on Liberation Day, because a lot of people heard about that massive announcement on that day and are a little bit confused about what has subsequently come, because frankly, it's kind of been a mess. It's been a little all over the map. So let's start. What happened on, quote, Liberation Day?
Yeah, so this was the Rose Garden ceremony, and President Trump held up this big table of new tariff rates. And I was watching it, I saw instantly, this is going to be a mess because these tariff rates were super high. And he claimed that they were reciprocal tariffs, but in fact, they had nothing to do with the tariff rates that other countries impose on American exports. And it turned out very quickly, someone on Twitter discovered that that these tariff rates were simply half of the bilateral trade deficit as a percentage of imports that the U.S. has with that country. So a country like Vietnam, poor country, they don't have much money to buy stuff from the U.S., but they do sell us a bunch of stuff because we've reshored a bunch of things from China to Vietnam. And so we buy a bunch of stuff from Vietnam. They don't buy a bunch of stuff from us. So they were hit with a massive tariff, one of the highest tariffs, simply because of the fact that, we trade a lot with them. And so actually, my first move was to get all of my retirement out of U.S. equities. Because I knew this would be a major hit to the market. And that's exactly what happened. And that happened for several days as the market processed how high and sort of arbitrary these tariffs were.
Yeah. Yes, I remember hearing the reciprocal tariffs. Now, in a vacuum, okay, I guess I could understand this idea of playing chicken for a period of time with foreign countries to reduce their tariffs so that we can reduce our tariffs, less tariffs on both sides, freer trade. That's a good thing. And so at the very start of this, before I realized that they were not reciprocal tax rates, which by the way, is not the greatest thing about X, is like just people can put things out there and then you're like, all right, huh? And then we all figure it out together. Anyway, I love that. But trade deficits, and it very quickly, the administration's even language moved from reciprocal tax rates to trade deficits. And I still can't wrap my head around it, because I think it's because it makes no sense. Is there an inherent issue with a trade deficit? Does that mean somehow that we are being screwed because there is a trade deficit?
No. And really, the only economist who believes this apparently is Peter Navarro, whom Trump is apparently listening to. I have got a trade deficit with my grocery store. They don't buy anything from me. I buy a lot of stuff from them. They don't have tariffs on me. They don't have their own currency that they're manipulating. There are no trade barriers there. They're not treating me unfairly. It's obvious that I would have a trade deficit with them. And it's not a problem. And the same applies to countries. There are countries that we have a trade surplus with. They buy stuff from us, and more than we buy from them. And there are other countries that we buy more from than sell to. And that's all very normal. Now, the fact that the U.S. has an overall trade deficit, that actually reflects the fact that the U.S. is a very attractive place to invest, which might not be obvious at first glance. But the other way to think about a trade deficit is that it's an investment surplus. And maybe if economists use that language more often, maybe none of this would have happened, because investment surplus sounds good. So what happens is that when other countries are, or investors, really, we're talking about individuals and companies in other countries, are investing in the U.S., they're lending money to us, or they're buying our stocks or whatever. That gives us more money to buy things, and so some of what we buy is imports. And so, really, the other side of the coin of a trade deficit is that investment surplus. And that's the reason why we tend to have a trade deficit in most years, is because foreigners like investing in the U.S., lending us money.
Right. All right. So Liberation Day, we have these kind of across the board 10%, right? Plus across the board, initially referred to as reciprocal tariffs. But even countries that don't tariff us at all got an across the board 10%. Is that correct?
That's right. And countries that don't tariff us at all got higher than 10% initially, so long as there was a bigger trade deficit.
Deficit.
So,
Right.
Israel, for example, doesn't have any tariffs on U.S. goods. I think they were hit with a 17% tariff. South Korea was hit with like a
Oh,
30%
really?
tariff.
Because I was reliably informed then that Israel came to the table and wanted to drop all their tariffs. And then I looked it up and they only tariffed 2% of what they actually get from us. And I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah. So in the days before Liberation Day, they ended even those tariffs because they wanted to make sure that they weren't going to get hit with anything, and little did they
Exactly.
know.
So then I'm hearing days go by, right? And you're hearing so many different narratives out of the exact same administration, depending on who you're talking to, which is another reason why the markets went absolutely bananas, because no one knew where this was headed, right? If you talk to some of the people, or if you talk to Peter Navarro, this was about trade deficits. You talk to some people, it was about reciprocal taxes or reciprocal tariffs. If you talk to some people, it was just about, yeah, we're just playing chicken. We're going to negotiate things down. Then we're not going to have any tariffs. And if you talk to Donald Trump, though, this was somehow about reordering the economy, which I also cannot quite wrap my head around. Somehow that we are going to use the money that we're going to get from tariffs to pay down the national debt. Can you explain that to me? How does that work? And or eliminate the income tax, which we all know is never happening. Can you explain this, quote, reordering of the economy? We're going to save the middle class. We're going to save manufacturing.
Yeah, at various times he said different things. So he
Right.
said that trade deficits are other countries stealing from us. So trade wars are good and easy to win because so long as you buy less from other countries, you win. And we've already talked about that and why that's mistaken. At various times, he said that, yeah, he wants to use the revenue from tariffs to abolish the income tax or pay down the federal debt. The only problem with that is that the more revenue you raise from, the more, the higher the rate of the tariff. Eventually, the less revenue you raise because people stop buying the foreign goods,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
Mm-hmm.
so
Yep.
someone calculated that to replace the income tax, you would need to have tariffs of over 200% on everything, and people would still need to buy just as much. Of course, that's inconceivable. No one's going to do that. So that's really just impossible. The math doesn't work out for replacing the income tax with tariffs unless you cut government spending by like 90%. So I'd love for that to happen in some worlds, but that's not going to happen, and so that's unrealistic. The other argument he's made is that we're going to bring manufacturing back to the U.S. With these tariffs. Now that could happen if people start buying fewer foreign goods and buying more American goods as a result of the tariffs. Now, what that means, of course, is that we wouldn't be raising revenue with the tariffs because that would require people continuing to buy those foreign goods. But it does mean that certain American industries could grow as a result of those tariffs. So, for instance, we don't really make T-shirts anymore in this country. We don't make sneakers anymore in this country. These are things that we often design in this country, and we often do the financing for these industries in this country. But the actual sewing, the actual assembly is done in much poorer countries where there's a lot of unskilled labor that makes a low wage, right?
Yeah.
And so to make those things in this country would make them much, much more expensive. and would require basically hiring people away from more advanced industries. And so, yeah, you could do it. You could reshore some U.S. manufacturing, but it would have a big hit to the economy in general and really hurt, especially our advanced manufacturing, by the way.
Well, and so let's talk about that. So, sort of, high and low end manufacturing. There got to be sort of this narrative out there that we don't manufacture anything anymore. That's not true. We actually are kind of manufacturing things at sort of record, amounts as far as dollars. But it's high end manufacturing. It is not low end manufacturing, and that is true. And it doesn't require as many jobs because it's very efficient, and a lot of it's probably mechanized and that sort of thing. But I guess I just don't see the advantage and also this idea that somehow we have a shrinking middle class. I started hearing this out of conservatives, and I'm thinking, Bernie Sanders would like his talking point back. That is simply not true. The middle class is not shrinking. If anything, it's the upper middle class that has grown a little bit, maybe taken away from the middle class. But there actually is not a fundamental issue with the middle class that somehow we need lower end manufacturing jobs to come back here. Can you even see a scenario where it somehow benefits the United States if we bring back more low end manufacturing?
Yeah, I don't see any benefit to that because again, it is going to kill the advanced manufacturing. My wife actually happens to work in fiber laser manufacturing. So it's an advanced technology, requires advanced physics to design these products. It's a very large company with subsidiaries all over the world. They're getting killed by tariffs, and she sees this because she's the one responsible for buying their components. And so it's not just their company, by the way; it's the entire industry. I don't want to suggest that her company is facing unique troubles because they're
Right.
not. But it is going to hurt their industry in general because they're buying steel, they're buying precious metals, they're buying diodes, they're buying sub-assemblies, and and the compliance costs alone of the tariffs are something people haven't been talking about a lot, but those are huge as well because for every sub-assembly they bring in, they have to have a certificate from the smelter of the steel in that sub-assembly noting the country of origin. And of course, these sub-assemblies can be very complex, could have parts coming from many countries. Some parts come from their own subsidiaries, some come from suppliers that they're purchasing from. They don't know where the steel came from. And
Right.
so things are getting held up at the border. They're getting applied Chinese tariffs to them. If they say they don't know, well, you have to pay the highest applicable tariff. So this is really hurting their industry. It's hurting their ability to sell abroad because of foreign retaliation. So it's a big problem. And yeah, so we're hurting the advanced manufacturers, and we're ignoring the fact that, yeah, as you say, real median family income, so the income made inflation adjusted by the average typical family, has grown a lot over the last 20 years. If you want to look at a time when, the average American family wasn't doing so hot, you could look at, the late 80s to mid 90s as a time period when, those wages were pretty stagnant. But over the last 20 years, we've actually grown a lot, interrupted by the Great Recession. So Americans were doing pretty well. The economy was doing okay, other than higher than normal inflation due to Biden's policies and Powell's policies. But we didn't need to wreck the economy. We didn't need to fundamentally reorder it. We were the economic superpower of the world. You'd much rather be the U.S. than Europe.
I was actually completely taken off guard by the reaction, even from friends of mine, of, well, we have to do something because things are so dire and desperate and awful. And I'm like, okay, no, the inflation is a real problem. Okay. And it has been a problem since COVID spending set it off. Okay. And to me, that is the fundamental issue. I would also argue, and you can tell me whether I'm right or wrong, that, obviously economies kind of have a natural curve. They go up and down on their own, regardless of whatever you do. And we probably are headed into a downturn, but that's not necessarily a natural or a problem. Or certainly not a problem that needs to be solved by the heavy handed of government. But I just don't understand where this narrative came from overnight of, we are in a dire circumstance. Everything must be reordered by central planners. Do you understand that?
Well, there has been a small group of people who describe themselves as being on the right who've been pushing this since about 2016, 2017. After the first Trump election, there's a group of so-called national conservatives who wanted to kind of put together an ideological framework to support what they saw as kind of the essence of Trumpism. And I'm not sure they got the essence of Trumpism right, but there's no doubt that they've had an effect on people like Josh Hawley, even to some extent J.D. Vance, and they're starting to have an effect on meat and potatoes conservatives
Yeah.
too. And their whole idea was, America needs industrial policy. We need central planning. We need, people need to be working in factories. And if we give up on some prosperity in order to have, more Americans in blue collar jobs, content maybe with slow or no growth, then we should have that. That was, their idea was almost like, this is going to be a spiritual renewal. We're going to give up on economic growth so that, people can be, nobly poor.
And you
And
totally win elections like that.
yeah, I think it's a very much a minority current on the right, and really doesn't have anything to do with traditional American conservatism, which was always about free markets, opportunity, growth, optimism, capitalism, and it has a lot more to do with an old style throne and altar conservatism from Europe that was much more about state control and making sure people stay in their place, right? And kind of working through unions and making sure that everyone has some sort of guaranteed job, but they can't aspire to anything higher because they know their place, right?
Yeah.
That was a very influential view in European conservatism, but never until very recently in American conservatism.
It's interesting. When that, I just call it pure propaganda, but the influencers on the right sort of putting out, well, if 170 countries have tariffs, then they can't be so bad. And I'm like, well, if every country had lockdowns, they can't be so bad. And you know what? First of all, no country had across the board tariffs the way that we implemented on Liberation Day. So they're not, you're comparing apples and oranges, but also I don't want to live like them, Karen. Okay. Like I want to have more. Is that so wrong? Okay. Okay. Now, not because of the stock market. All right. It seemed to me that the Trump administration anticipated that the stock market would go haywire. They didn't seem concerned about the stock market going haywire. But the thing that seemed to finally get to them and make them change course radically was the bond market. Would you agree with that?
Well, that's what Trump himself said, that the bond market was getting a little squirrely, I think maybe was what he said. And so that's when he decided to suspend them for 90 days. And, but we could go through all of this again, right? And what is it now? Like,
we
80
could.
days.
I anticipate he's just going to kind of let this go. I could be wrong. So when he is, so what happened next? He spends it all for 90 days, except for he still has the 10% in, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Across the board, 10%. And
That's
then
right.
He tariff the Dickens out of China. Right. So now he's going to make it seem like it's just about China. I think if he had started with this is just about China, we wouldn't have seen the sort of catastrophic results that we've seen. I'm not saying that there wouldn't be a lot of, downwind issues economically. There would still be pain, but there wouldn't have been this chaotic response. Do you believe it was always just about China and this is somehow 4D chess?
No, When you look at what Donald Trump has said about trade going back to the 1980s, it's very consistent.
Yeah.
And he finally, got the administration that he wants. He's got the advisors that he wants. And I still think there are people like Scott Bessent and Kevin Hassett who are, trying to say in his ear, like, hey, let's do a little bit better here. Let's not tariff-friendly countries as much you know, as we initially were. But I think fundamentally he believes in tariffs. He believes it's going to make us richer somehow, even though investors disagree with him, economists disagree with him. Um, and so that I think that was the original plan, and then now it's on a different footing, and it's better than it was. It's still worth pointing out that our average tariff rate is still the highest in the industrialized world now, and you can only find a handful of countries, most of them basket cases like Venezuela, that have higher average tariffs than we do. It's that 10% across the board, huge tariffs on China, 25% on cars, 25% on steel and aluminum. He says pharmaceuticals tariffs are coming. Um, so, we're still not out of the woods. I guess what I'm saying, and that's what markets are showing us, that we're still not out of the woods on this.
We have a couple of new sponsors. If you're serious about your health and your coffee, listen up. Cardiology Coffee is the brainchild of renowned cardiologist Dr. Jack Wolfson, who wanted one thing: incredible coffee without the junk. No pesticides, no mold, no mycotoxins, just clean, organic, antioxidant-rich coffee that supports heart health and actually tastes amazing. This cardiologist certified coffee grown ethically in the rich soil of Honduras by a woman-run collective and tested by third-party labs to guarantee zero contaminants. Always organic, delivered fresh, packed with polyphenols and heart-healthy nutrients, mold and toxin-free every single time. Thousands have made the switch, and once you taste it, you will understand why. Go to dailycloutcoffee.com now to choose your perfect roast and shop clean coffee with purpose. Cardiology Coffee, healthy heart, clean start, great taste. Canada and Mexico, do they still have higher tariffs than? I can't even keep track of what was going on there because he started with that the day he got in office.
That's right. So those 25% tariffs are suspended.
Okay.
On everything except stuff that's not covered by USMCA. So there actually is 25% tariffs on Canada and Mexico on a small percentage of goods that are not covered by USMCA. And what I'm hearing, and I believe this is the latest, is that Canada and Mexico are not subject to the 10% tariff on USMCA compliant goods.
Okay. We've also seen him start creating carve-outs. So he has carved out from the Chinese tariffs, electronics, things like that. Next, I heard that there's going to be some type of, I guess I was unclear whether it'll be a carve out or whether we're actually just going to send them money to farmers, U.S. farmers who are being impacted by tariffs. And when I heard that, I'm like, okay, well, this is the problem with central planning. It creates problems. Now we have more problems, and now we're going to create more problems by solving more problems. So what we're just going to do you know what's going on with the farmers? Was he saying that we're just going to hand them money, or that we're going to somehow give them a tariff exemption?
Yeah, what I heard was from Carolyn Levitt, and it sounds to me like like we're going to hand them money. I mean, that's what happened in his first term. Farmers looked at the retaliatory tariffs, because most of our farm sector, they're exporters, right? And so they're seeing problems in foreign markets as a result of our tariffs, and so in the first Trump administration, they were given just sort of an ad hoc cash payment as a kind of compensation for the tariffs that they were facing in foreign markets. And it sounds to me like that's what's being contemplated again. The first time around, that ate up essentially all of the revenue raised from tariffs. So we'll have to see what happens this time.
What a mess. What a mess. So what do you okay, I understand that this is sort of speculation. Do you think that China messed with the bond market?
I think that it wasn't just China. So China might have done some. Yeah, China might have sold some bonds. But we haven't seen, since that first sale, we haven't seen those yields come down substantially. They came down a little bit, but they're still fairly high. And so I think the best explanation, especially when you see the US dollar being sold off, when you see gold going up, is that there's a kind of sell American move in international markets right now. And it could be that the dollar is losing its reserve currency status in kind of slow motion. And my guess is that um, this will happen slowly and then quickly. And who knows how long it might take, but there will be a turning point when, as countries set up alternative payment, mechanisms, that the dollar could go down quite a bit in a hurry.
So that's a good segue. You're involved, as I am, with state level politics, legislation. There are limitations, right, to what states can do when it comes to the economy, right? Is there anything that a state could do legislatively to try to, I don't know, weather the storm better?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, we can definitely do things to, as economists put in wonky terms, shift out the aggregate supply curve. So basically, make our economy more productive, get out of the way of entrepreneurs and workers, and that means tax reform. So don't tax capital investment. Shift your taxes to things like consumption. Um, I actually think that the property taxes, when they're set locally, are a relatively efficient form of taxation. And there's some research on this, and actually an AIER explainer that will be coming out before long on this issue. So, but shifting taxes away from that investment, where you're discouraging investment, and eliminating barriers. So barriers to entry, like occupational licensing and licensing regulations, easing up permitting, speeding up permitting for manufacturing, for infrastructure, for housing. These are all things that states can do to just make their economies more productive, kind of give them a kick in the seat of the pants. And that makes everything easier, because when you make your economy more productive, not only do you raise people's incomes, but generally you reduce costs. So if we, no matter what the Fed does, no matter what happens with the tariffs, if we see inflation again, states will do better the more they pursue this kind of abundance agenda, if you will, of productivity growth.
What do you know about, they passed this in Utah. I believe Florida is working on it as well. The idea of transactional gold.
Mm-hmm.
And gold and silver, I think Utah did. So this idea that states will allow banks to basically buy gold and silver that you can buy and have sort of like a debit card to use for your gold and silver in the same way that you would use a debit card for currency.
Yeah.
What do you know anything about that?
Yeah, I try to follow that a little bit, and I think it's a great idea to ease barriers to transacting in precious metals. Um, you could, in theory, make gold and silver legal tender. It's
Yeah,
actually not inconsistent with the U.S. Constitution to make gold and
no,
silver legal tender.
that's right.
So states could do that. They could. Um, ease, tax payments in precious metals if people want to do that. And so, those are ways that I guess you could make it easier for people to use precious metals in commerce. But, right now, I mean, the big thing is you can buy gold if you want and sit on it as a hedge against inflation. And that's really kind of its main value. And we already have that ability. So I'm not sure that these state laws that that work on these margins are really going to change a whole lot of people's behavior. The main thing is, if you want to hedge against inflation, yeah, get some precious metals.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay, well, where do you see let's say hypothetically that we kind of keep these very high Chinese tariffs, kind of keep this 10% across the board. He just kind of keeps kicking the can down the road as far as the 90 days. 90 days becomes 6 months, becomes a year. Where do you see the economy headed kind of on its current trajectory?
Yeah, I mean, it's always tough to forecast, and economists are notoriously bad at it. So, I often just look at the markets, because usually what you find is that the markets forerun the real economy. So, the markets will respond immediately to a stimulus that doesn't hit our pocketbooks for months later.
Yeah.
And so I think that's what's happening here, is that, we're probably going to see the prices of perishable goods subject to tariffs go up first, because they're harder to stockpile.
Sure.
So we're probably likely to see in grocery stores, for example, prices go up in the next month to 2 months. And then, more durable goods, consumer durables, will probably take a little bit longer. Some car manufacturers actually rushed a bunch of cars to U.S. shores ahead of the tariffs. So they saw this coming and got ahead of it. And so I think those price increases might be several months down the line. Things like housing, they're going to be hit with tariffs on steel, on lumber, right? Building materials that is going to make housing more expensive. But again, there's going to be a little bit of a lag there. And then we have to see how the Fed responds. The Fed's in a touchy spot. They can raise interest rates to try to combat inflation here. But then that's likely going to hit growth and maybe cause unemployment as well. So, a lot depends on how the Fed responds. I think they're waiting to see what inflation data comes down. My, just my personal worry, if you want to kind of my opinion, kind of thumb to the wind sort of thing. My worry is that the inflation data come in better than expected the next couple of months, and so the Fed feels fine letting this go, and maybe even cutting rates, and then we end up with inflation really hitting us in 6 months' time.
Yeah, I am worried about that too. You mentioned before that you felt like Powell was, part of the reason why inflation really got out of control during the Biden years. I assume you mean because they did not raise the interest rates enough.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And they thought this inflation was transitory, was the term they
Oh,
used.
right. I remember that term. Yes. Uh-huh.
And it was not. And who knew? Huge federal deficit spending combined with massive increases in the money supply still causes inflation.
It's such an antiquated concept, Jason.
Right. And they still haven't tackled it. Right?
No.
We still have inflation above target. They didn't move fast enough. They're still not moving fast enough.
Yeah.
And in fact, they started cutting rates even when inflation was not down to target.
It was
So
crazy, but that seems to be President Trump's MO is, you know, just push them as low as humanly possible, as low. I mean, he's not upset with Jerome Powell for the reasons why you and I are concerned. He is upset because he's not cutting the rates quick enough.
yeah, he wants to terminate Powell, and yeah, I'd like to see Powell gone, because Powell was too much of a dove. But yeah, I mean, I think if somehow President Trump gets seizes the power to appoint um, many board members and the chair of the Fed, I think we'll see a much more inflationary monetary policy.
Scary, scary. All right. Well, we didn't end on a very positive note, but thank you so much for coming on. Tell people how they can find you.
Yeah, so you can find my work at aier.org. And in particular, you should check out The Daily Economy, which is our publication that is daily. As it sounds like, we get publish several things a day, get thousands of visitors. It's definitely a kind of one-stop shop for staying on top of the economic news. And that's at thedailyeconomy.org.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Melissa.
Have a good day. That is it for the Liberty Lobbyists. I'm Melissa Blasek. You can find me on X at Melissa Blasek NH or at Rebuild NH. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, you can email me director@rebuildnh.com. Until next time.